Let every sound around you slowly fade away until only the rhythm of your breath remains, the gentle glow of the night, and the distant echo of a civilization long asleep within the folds of time. Tonight, I will guide you through the gates of history, to a place where Rome was not merely an empire, but a grand dream of humankind, the dream of power, of order, and of the yearning to reach eternity. From the twin brothers, Romulus and Remus, by the banks of the Tiber, to Augustus, the man who turned a city of brick into one of marble. From the radiant splendor of Pax Romana to the final echo when Constantinople fell, each chapter is a breath of humanity, resounding through the millennia. Let your mind drift along the Tiber. Close your eyes amid the whispers of the past, and join me on a journey through the rise, glory, decline, and immortal legacy of the Roman Empire. A story still flowing in the veins of our world today. Tonight you will merge into the current of legendary history and awaken in knowledge. The Romans did not begin their story with chronicles, but with myth. They told that once, in the royal court of Alba Longa, the ancient city of Aeneas's descendants, the Trojan prince, a prophecy was spoken. 2 children of divine blood would change the destiny of the land. They were Romulus and Remus, born of Rhea Silvia, a Vestal priestess of the goddess Vesta, and Mars, the god of war. But earthly power has always feared the children of fate. King Amulius, terrified of losing his throne, ordered the infants to be slain. The 2 newborns were cast into the swirling waters of the Tiber. Yet the river did not swallow them. It embraced them, carrying the brothers to a wild valley beneath the Palatine Hill. There, a she-wolf named Lupa heard their cries. She did not tear them apart, but bowed her head and nursed them at her breast. A symbol of life was born in the sacred wilderness, where instinct met destiny. Later, a shepherd named Faustulus found them and took them home to raise with his wife. Under human care, the divine twins grew into strong, courageous men, their hearts still echoing with an ancient call, the call of kingship and destiny. When they learned the truth of their birth, Romulus and Remus returned to slay Amulius and restored the throne to their grandfather, King Numitor. Then they chose the land where they had been saved to build a new city. But fate is never easily shared. A dispute arose over its boundaries, and in a moment of fury, Romulus killed his brother. From the blood of Remus, Rome was born in 753 BC, its destiny etched in tragedy and power. From that moment, Rome carried within it 2 souls, that of Romulus, the will to rule, and that of Remus, the spirit of rebellion and freedom. This duality became the essence of Rome itself, both empire and republic, conqueror and liberator. In those days, Rome was but a cluster of small villages, nestled among hills and marshes, caught between mightier neighbors, the Etruscans to the north and Greek colonies to the south. Yet within it pulsed a strange vitality, the unity of outcasts, runaway slaves, and exiles seeking refuge. Romulus, the first king, opened the gates to all who wished to dwell there. Rome was not born of pure blood, but from a mingling of peoples, cultures, and faiths. That was its first secret of greatness. Rome, from its very birth, was a miniature world, but there were far more men than women, and to secure future generations, Romulus devised a plan: the rape of the Sabine women. At a festival to which the Sabines were invited, he gave a signal, and his soldiers seized their daughters as wives. Barbaric by modern standards, but to the ancient Romans, it marked the beginning of unity and assimilation. After battles and tears, the Sabines and the Romans finally lived as one, sharing the throne and laying the foundation for the spirit of alliance, a principle that would one day help Rome expand across the entire Mediterranean. After Romulus, 6 kings followed, each shaping the eternal city's form and soul. Numa Pompilius, his successor, was the opposite of Romulus. He expanded not through war, but through faith and law. It was said Numa communed with the nymph Egeria in the sacred groves to learn the wisdom of governance. Under his reign, Rome learned to honor peace. He founded the Temple of Janus, whose doors closed only when the nation was free of war. For the next 7 centuries, they were rarely shut. Then came Tullus Hostilius, who returned Rome to conquest. He destroyed Alba Longa, the ancestral home of Romulus. But instead of annihilation, he assimilated its people, reflecting a Roman creed. Today's enemy is tomorrow's citizen. The era's most famous tale was the duel of the Horatii and the Curiatii, 3 warriors from each city fighting to decide supremacy. It was a battle not only for dominance, but to lessen bloodshed, for Rome always knew how to turn violence into order. Next came Ancus Marcius, who blended war with construction. He built the first wooden bridge across the Tiber, Pons Sublicius, and founded the port of Ostia, opening Rome to the sea. From then, a fishing village began to breathe commerce, and the sea became the road of destiny. When Tarquinius Priscus, an Etruscan by origin, ascended the throne, Rome first touched a higher civilization. He built the temple of Jupiter Capitolinus, the Circus Maximus, and the great sewer Cloaca Maxima, which drained the marshes and turned the land into the first political and commercial center, the Roman Forum. From then on, Rome was no longer a village, but a symbol of creation, a place where humankind mastered nature. His successor, Servius Tullius, was hailed as Rome's first great reformer. He divided citizens not by birth, but by wealth, creating the Centuriate Assembly, the forerunner of parliamentary democracy. He also built the Servian Wall, encircling the city's 7 legendary hills: Palatine, Aventine, Capitoline, Quirinal, Viminal, Esquiline, and Caelian. 7 hills, 7 veins circling the heart of Rome, symbols of unity and diversity, a principle Rome would uphold for millennia. But behind the light of reform lurks the shadow of ambition. Tarquinius Superbus, the last king, was the embodiment of arrogance and cruelty. He seized the throne by murder and ruled with an iron fist. Under him, Rome grew in wealth, but its soul of freedom began to suffocate. Then, a single tragedy shook the forming empire to its core. His son, Sextus Tarquinius, on a night of revelry, violated Lucretia, the wife of the nobleman Collatinus. Shamed and dishonored, she took her own life before her husband and friends, vowing that her death would bring justice to Rome. Her blood ignited the first revolution in Western history. Under the banner of Lucius Junius Brutus, the people rose, banished the Tarquins, and swore never again to be ruled by kings. In 59 BC, the Roman Republic was born, a system not of divine right, but of human reason. Instead of a single monarch, 2 consuls were elected each year, sharing power and holding veto over one another. Above them stood the Senate, Senatus, where elders deliberated the fate of the nation. It was not a perfect democracy, but it was a monumental leap from divine rule to the rule of law and collective reason. At that time, Rome was but a small city of fewer than 35,000 souls. Yet within its fragile political structure lay an idea that would change the world: self-governance. The Romans believed that order came not from fear, but from law and honor. Each citizen bore both duty and right to serve in the army, obey the law, and contribute to the common good. Within that relationship between the individual and the state, Rome sowed the seed of civic virtue, the moral foundation of every modern republic. As the first dawn of the republic rose over the 7 hills, the clang of the blacksmith's hammer mingled with the bells of the temples. Rome was no longer the story of one man or one bloodline, but of a people learning to master their own destiny. They had risen from the milk of the she-wolf to the law of man, from myth to institution, from faith to responsibility. The Roman Republic was not the summit, but the beginning, the first step in the immortal aspiration that would carry them from the small plains of Latium to the light of Rome shining across 3 continents. When you close your eyes, imagine the Tiber still flowing, slow, unceasing. On its banks, the 7 hills stand silent beneath the moon, witnesses to a journey just begun. For Rome, like humanity, was not born in glory, but in struggle, yearning, and memory. The dreams of those who dared to believe in eternity. Tonight, you are hearing the dawn of civilization, where legend turns to history, and a single spark is about to illuminate the world. When the first rays of dawn struck the stone walls of young Rome, the clang of the forge and the prayers rising from the temples beat together like the heart of a newly awakened people. From the milk of the she-wolf, from the blood of kings, from the tears of Lucretia, Rome learned to stand on its own feet. The Republic was born, fragile yet proud, and the world beyond remained a land of trials. The 6th century before Christ opened not only the age of reason, but the age of will, an era when a small people would forge the power to conquer the Mediterranean. At that time, Rome was still but a small city-state on the Italian peninsula. Around it thrived fierce tribes, the Etruscans in the north, the Sabines and Samnites in the hills, the Latins and allied towns to the south. These powers, sometimes allies, sometimes foes, intertwined in a web of restless politics. Yet Rome's true strength lay not in soldiers or resources, but in unity of will. The Romans believed it is better to die for one's country than to live in shame, and with that creed, they turned every wound into discipline, every defeat into law. But Rome's first enemy did not stand beyond its gates. It was within. After the fall of kingship, 2 classes emerged: the patricians, aristocrats owning land and power, and the plebeians, the working citizens, the majority of the population, yet excluded from governance. At first, the people had to obey the decrees of the Senate, composed of the nobles, Under the rule of the patrician elite, no written laws existed. The common people could be condemned without defense, lose their land, or be enslaved for debt. From this injustice, a silent yet relentless struggle began, the war between fairness and privilege. The plebeians rebelled by refusing to serve in the army, an act that nearly paralyzed the republic. They withdrew from the city, set up their own encampment, and demanded to be heard. To prevent collapse, the Senate was forced to yield. In 494 BC, the office of tribune of the plebs was established. Representatives of the common people who possessed veto power, the right to strike down any unjust decree. Soon after, the citizens demanded written laws to end arbitrary judgments. After years of dispute, in 450 BC, the 12 tables were inscribed upon bronze and placed at the heart of the forum. For the first time in Western history, law was made visible and accessible to all. Order was no longer the word of the powerful, it became the covenant of the community. As the historian Livy wrote, "Law is the bond of the civilized world." From that foundation, Rome began to forge itself in the fires of war. The Republic was young, yet every citizen was a soldier. Each man bore within him virtus, the military virtue that embodied honor, loyalty, and discipline. They fought not only to defend their land, but to define who they were. During the 4th and 3rd centuries BC, Rome waged long campaigns against neighboring tribes, defeating the Etruscans, subduing the Latin cities, and enduring the brutal Samnite Wars in the Apennine Mountains. 3 Samnite Wars tempered Rome like iron in flame. From early humiliation at the Caudine Forks, where Roman legions were forced to pass under the yoke in disgrace, they learned patience and reform. Rome reorganized its armies, built vast networks of roads for mobility, and laid the foundations of the Roman legion, the most disciplined and enduring military force of the ancient world. By the 3rd century BC, all of Italy lay under Rome's dominion. Yet across the Tyrrhenian Sea, a new rival was rising, Carthage, a Phoenician maritime empire commanding the western Mediterranean. Their clash became known as the Punic Wars, 3 conflicts spanning over a century, turning the entire Mediterranean into a chessboard of blood. The First Punic War, 264–241 BC, began over the island of Sicily, fertile and strategic. Rome, having no navy, learned to build ships and fight at sea. After 2 decades of struggle, Rome prevailed, seizing Sicily, its first overseas province. But victory was merely the prelude to a greater storm. The Second Punic War, 218–201 BC, entered legend through the name of Hannibal Barca, Carthage's military genius. He led his army, including war elephants, across the Alps through snow and storms, descending into Italy itself. In 216 BC, at the Battle of Cannae, Hannibal encircled and annihilated nearly 50,000 Romans in a single day, one of the greatest disasters in history. Rome was drowned in mourning, yet none surrendered. They clung to an ancient vow: never give up the Republic. Instead of confronting Hannibal head-on, they adopted the Fabian strategy, avoiding major battles, harassing and isolating him slowly. After nearly 20 years, Rome struck back on African soil. Under Scipio Africanus, They crushed Carthage at the Battle of Zama, 202 BC. Hannibal fled, Carthage submitted, but hatred lingered. A century later, during the Third Punic War, Rome returned, razed the city to the ground, and sowed salt into its soil so that nothing might grow again. From that ash, Rome rose as the undisputed master of the Western Mediterranean. Yet power is like fire, it never stands still. With the West subdued, Rome turned its gaze eastward, toward Greece and the successor kingdoms of Alexander the Great, still radiant with culture and wealth. Rome conquered Macedonia, Syria, Asia Minor, and Corinth, the heart of Greek civilization. But unlike Carthage, they did not destroy Greece. They absorbed it. From that union was born a civilization blending Roman strength with Greek intellect. As one historian wrote, Greece, though conquered, took her conqueror captive. From then on, Rome was no longer a mere military city-state. It became the center of the ancient world. Ships from Spain, Egypt, Syria, and Gaul filled the harbor of Ostia. Merchants, philosophers, slaves, and soldiers mingled in marble streets. Latin voices echoed through distant provinces, and everywhere the Roman eagle soared beneath the sun. But as Rome grew vast, cracks began to appear in the soul of the Republic. The old divide between patrician and plebeian returned, now not only political, but economic. Veterans came home from war to find their farms seized, unable to compete with the immense slave estates. The wealthy amassed land and treasure, while the poor crowded into the city, living in the squalor of tenements. The Republic's ideal, res publica, the common good, decayed into a stage of power and intrigue. Rome had unified the outer world, but was fracturing within. On the Capitoline Hill, as the sun sank behind Jupiter's temple, the wind sighing through marble columns seemed to whisper the warning of old, that every glory carries within it the seed of decay. The Roman Republic had risen through discipline, faith, and blood. It had conquered Italy, crushed Carthage, expanded across the Mediterranean, and stood as the unrivaled force of humankind. Yet even at its brightest triumphs, the shadows of ambition and power had begun to stir, heralding a new era. Rome had fulfilled its destiny as a republic. Now it would step into another chapter, where names like Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus would emerge, bringing both light and fire. As the dust of conquest over the Mediterranean had barely settled, Rome returned in triumph. But within her, a deep fracture had formed. The fields of citizens lay abandoned. The soldiers who had fought for the Republic wandered homeless. Meanwhile, the aristocracy rose like new gods, owning land, slaves, gold, and power. Rome ruled the world, yet lost balance in its own soul. The Republic, born of a longing for justice, was turning into a theater of greed, intrigue, and domination. In the 2nd century BC, Rome reached the height of its power. Legions returned with spoils from Greece, Macedonia, Asia Minor, and Carthage. But those victories brought a hidden storm of inequality. Land was concentrated in the hands of the nobility, while the peasantry, the backbone of the Republic, was driven from their fields. Citizens became wanderers, living on free grain, and empty promises shouted in the forum. In that darkness, two brothers rose, Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus, descendants of Scipio Africanus. bearing the hope to revive the old republican ideals. Tiberius proposed agrarian reforms, redistributing public land to the poor, a measure that seemed just, but struck at the heart of aristocratic privilege. He was slain in the Forum itself, beaten to death by those who claimed to defend order. 10 years later, his brother Gaius continued the cause, granting citizenship to Italian allies and establishing social programs for the needy. Once again, the entrenched powers struck back. Surrounded and defeated, Gaius chose death over capture. The blood of the Gracchi stained the Forum red, a sign that the Republic's pure ideals had died with them. From that moment, Rome was no longer led by citizens, but by the ambitions of generals. After the Gracchi came the age of the commanders. In that century of turmoil, Gaius Marius, a man of humble birth, rose through sheer military genius. He opened the army to the poor, promising land to those who served. Thus Rome gained its strongest legions, but for the first time, the soldiers' loyalty belonged to their general, not to the Republic. Loyalty became a commodity bought with gold and land, and that ultimately would destroy the Republic. Marius's rival was Lucius Cornelius Sulla, a proud and ruthless aristocrat. When Marius drove him from power, Sulla refused to yield. He returned at the head of his army, doing the unthinkable, marching on Rome itself. The first civil war erupted, Romans killing Romans. When victorious, Sulla declared himself dictator, posting proscription lists on public walls, names of his enemies, whom anyone could murder and plunder with impunity. He restored the Senate's authority, but in silence, Rome had lost its soul. Sulla eventually retired, but the seed of political violence had been sown. Those who witnessed the chaos, among them a young Julius Caesar, would carry it forward to its deadly conclusion. Julius Caesar was born in 100 BC into a noble yet impoverished family, claiming descent from the goddess Venus. He was a man of intellect, ideal, and ambition. In his youth, he once said, "I would rather be first in a village than second in Rome." It was not mere pride, it was prophecy. Caesar ascended through politics, allying himself with two of the most powerful men of his age, Pompey, the conqueror of the East, and Crassus, the richest man in Rome. The three men formed the first triumvirate, an alliance of shadows that divided power among themselves. Caesar took command of Gaul, the cold, untamed land to the north, where he would carve his legend in steel and blood. Over 9 years of relentless campaigns, he subdued all of Gaul, crushed hundreds of tribes, and pushed Rome's dominion to the shores of the northern seas. He recorded his triumphs in Commentari de Bello Gallico, written in words so simple yet thunderous. Veni, vidi, vici. I came, I saw, I conquered. But while he was far away, in Rome, Pompey and the Senate began to fear him. They ordered him to disband his legions and return as a private citizen. Caesar knew if he obeyed, he would be destroyed. If he defied, he would ignite civil war. On a cold January night in 49 BC, he halted before the river Rubicon, the boundary between lawful authority and rebellion. He looked into the flowing darkness of the water and said, "Alea iacta est." The die is cast, and he crossed. The Roman Civil War began. Caesar marched on Rome not through slaughter, but through swiftness and the unwavering loyalty of his legions. Pompey fled to Greece, but was defeated at Pharsalus. When Caesar arrived in Egypt, Pompey was already dead, murdered on the shores of Alexandria. There, Caesar met Cleopatra, the young and brilliant queen whose charm and intellect matched his own. Their love became legend, not merely of passion, but of the union of two civilizations, Rome and Egypt. When Caesar returned to Rome, he was proclaimed Dictator Perpetuo, dictator for life. But he sought not only to rule, he sought to reform. He extended citizenship, restructured government, and reformed the calendar, creating the Julian calendar, the foundation of the one we use today. He dreamed of a Rome that was just, strong, and eternal. Yet the Republic could not endure a man who stood above its laws, even if that man was Caesar. Those who had once called him friend began to tremble before his power. On the Ides of March, 44 BC, in the hall of Pompey's theater, as Caesar entered the Senate, they drew their blades. He saw Brutus, his adopted son, his friend, and whispered, "Et tu, Brute?" Then he fell beneath the statue of Pompey, his former rival. Caesar's blood spread across the marble floor, and with him the Roman Republic bled its last. After his death, Rome plunged into chaos. Two new powers arose: Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal general, and Octavian, his young heir, barely 18. Together they formed a temporary alliance to destroy Caesar's assassins, defeating them at the Battle of Philippi. But power once again divided them. Antony turned eastward to Cleopatra, once the lover of Caesar. Together they built their own kingdom, daring to defy Rome itself. Octavian understood. To unite Rome, he had to end the age of division. In 31 BC, at the Battle of Actium, his fleet crushed the forces of Antony and Cleopatra. The lovers took their own lives, ending both love and empire in one tragic flame. In 27 BC, Octavian returned to Rome in glory. The Senate granted him the title Augustus, meaning the revered one. He did not call himself king, but every power rested in his hands: army, treasury, law, and people. The Republic was dead. The Roman Empire was born. Yet for Augustus, power was not merely possession. It was duty, to restore order and peace after a century of civil war. Under his reign, Rome entered the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, a golden era of nearly 2 centuries when law, trade, and art flourished across 3 continents. Upon the marble steps of the Forum, where once daggers flashed and betrayal whispered, now echoed only the measured steps of craftsmen, merchants, and scholars. A new age had dawned, the age of emperors, of order, and of the dream of immortality. But within the golden light of Augustus's morning, one could still hear faint echoes of the past. The whispers of Caesar, of the Gracchi, of the fallen Republic. That every empire, no matter how resplendent, is born from the sacrifice of freedom. Rome had purchased peace with blood. From now on, the story of Rome would no longer be that of the people, but of emperors who bore within them both the light and shadow of the gods. When the smoke of the last civil wars cleared, a new dawn rose over Rome. The city, once drenched in the blood of its own citizens, breathed at last the long sigh of peace. Julius Caesar was gone, but his heir, Octavian, now bearing the name Augustus, had turned the ashes of the Republic into the foundation of a new world. After 5 centuries of turmoil and ambition, Rome had finally found a man who could restore order, not by sword, but by will and law. Augustus ruled for nearly half a century, and in that time, he redefined the very nature of power. He refused the title of Rex, king, for Romans despised the word. Instead, he chose the humbler one, Princeps Civitatis, first citizen. Yet beneath that modest guise, he wielded absolute control over the army, the treasury, and the law. He told the Senate he was returning power to the people, but in truth, all authority rested firmly in his hands. The beginning of a monarchy cloaked in republican form, known as the Principate. Augustus understood that Rome could not live forever on conquest. It needed stability and a soul. He reformed taxation, founded fire brigades and a city watch, and created the first postal system in history. He rebuilt Rome, from brick into marble, as he proudly said. I found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble. Under him began the Pax Romana, 2 centuries without civil war, when law, commerce, and arts spread from the deserts of Africa to the forests of Britain. But this peace was not the silence of weakness, it was the strength of order. Frontiers were fortified with legions. Roman standards flew along the Rhine, the Danube, and deep into Syria's sands. Rome had become the beating heart of a world spanning 3 continents, and Latin resounded as humanity's common pulse. After Augustus came Tiberius, a brilliant general, cold and suspicious. He ruled with caution and iron discipline, yet loneliness and distrust drove him into seclusion on the island of Capri, leaving power to corrupt hands. Still, the order Augustus built stood firm as marble. Then came Caligula, Tiberius's great-nephew, young, handsome, but slipping into madness. From reverence, the people soon beheld horror. He proclaimed himself a living god, demanded worship, and even threatened to appoint his horse as consul. Rome shuddered, for within the vast body of the empire, the disease of absolute power had begun to spread. After Caligula's assassination, the throne passed to Claudius, once dismissed as weak and foolish. Yet behind that mockery, he proved one of Rome's finest administrators. Claudius expanded the empire into Britannia, modern Britain, reformed administration, and appointed capable officials from provincial citizens. He understood that for Rome to endure, it could no longer belong only to Italians. It must become the empire of all humankind. Then came Nero, an emperor of artistic temperament, entranced by power and by himself. At first, guided by the philosopher Seneca, Nero ruled with mercy. But luxury and delusion turned him into a symbol of corruption. After the Great Fire consumed half the city, he blamed the Christians, beginning the first bloody persecution in history. Before his suicide, Nero uttered his final, haunting words, "What an artist dies in me," a phrase both proud and tragic, the elegy of Rome's first golden age. After years of chaos, the empire was restored by Vespasian, founder of the Flavian dynasty. A man of humble birth, pragmatic and disciplined, he was an emperor of the people. Under his rule, Rome revived. He built the Colosseum, the grand arena rising over Nero's vanished palace, a monument of reconciliation between ruler and people. Vespasian declared, "Money does not stink," believing that every coin, no matter how humble its source, could serve the good of the state. His son Titus reigned only 2 years, but was beloved as delight of mankind. When Mount Vesuvius erupted, burying Pompeii and Herculaneum, Titus led relief efforts with compassion and courage. His early death plunged the empire into mourning. His successor Domitian was capable yet tyrannical, obsessed with his own divinity and feared by the Senate. When he was assassinated, Rome once again faced its eternal choice, freedom or order, and once again it chose order. From this point began the era of the 5 good emperors, under whom Rome reached the zenith of power and civilization. Nerva, the first, ruled briefly but wisely, introducing the principle of adopting a worthy successor, ensuring that power would pass by merit, not blood. His adopted son was Trajan, the emperor whom history would remember as the greatest of all Rome. Trajan expanded the empire to its widest reach, from the highlands of Scotland to the shores of the Persian Gulf. He conquered Dacia, modern Romania, bringing back immense treasures of gold and silver, and raised the column of Trajan, its spiraling marble reliefs carved with every scene of his victories. Yet he was not only a conqueror, but a benevolent ruler. Through his Alimenta program, he provided welfare and education for the poor, ensuring that Rome's greatness rested upon compassion as much as conquest. To the Roman people, Trajan became the very image of justice. Even centuries later, when the Senate hailed a new emperor, they would say, "May you rule better than Trajan and more justly than Augustus." His successor, Hadrian, was a thinker, a philosopher and architect of empire. He realized that Rome had reached the natural limits of its expansion. Instead of seeking new conquests, he fortified what already was. In Britain, he built Hadrian's Wall, stretching nearly 120 kilometers, a line between civilization and wilderness. He adored Greek culture, honored philosophy, and left behind the Pantheon, its dome still the most perfect ever built by human hands. To Hadrian, Rome was not merely power, it was civilization itself. After Hadrian came Antoninus Pius, the emperor of absolute peace. For over 20 years, he waged no wars, devoting his reign to construction, law, and governance. The Romans said that under him, children could play before the city gates without fear. And then came the summit of humanity's empire, Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king, an emperor, a warrior, and a sage. Amid the frozen camps along the Danube, he wrote Meditations, a book that endures to this day, filled with words both simple and eternal. Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one. Marcus believed in duty, in reason, and in living according to the divine order of nature. Under his reign, the Roman Empire became the most complete political, legal, and cultural system the ancient world had ever known. Its laws were codified, its cities flourished with baths, libraries, amphitheaters, and stone aqueducts. Latin and Greek became the twin languages of knowledge, binding East and West together. From Britannia to Egypt, citizens could travel, trade, and live under the same legal order, a miracle never before seen in human history. But even the brightest sun must one day fall to dusk. As Marcus Aurelius lay dying, the empire stood at the height of its splendor. Yet the first clouds of twilight gathered on the horizon. He passed the throne to his son Commodus, ending the noble tradition of succession by merit, and beginning an age of inheritance and decay. Plagues from the east swept through the empire, killing millions. The treasury drained by border wars. The nobility sank into luxury, forgetting the austerity that had once built Rome. The empire was still immense, but its heart had begun to tire. As night fell over the Capitoline Hill, one might still hear in the wind the whisper of Marcus Aurelius, a prayer to all mankind. All things fade into the storied past and are soon buried in oblivion. Rome had reached the human heaven, and from that height the sun of empire began to set. When Marcus Aurelius drew his final breath in a camp beside the Danube, one of the most radiant chapters in Roman history closed. The cold wind swept through the tents, carrying the sigh of a philosopher king who once wrote, "Everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact. Everything we see is a perspective, not the truth." He lived and ruled with the serenity of reason, leaving Rome vast, disciplined, and bound together by philosophy. But as the light of the sage dimmed, the shadow of the crisis of the 3rd century fell upon the empire, an age when the very virtues that built Rome began to rot from within. Marcus's heir, Commodus, was no philosopher but a vain showman intoxicated by power. He saw the throne as a stage, and himself as the lead actor in a bloody spectacle. He had statues carved of himself as Hercules, wielding a club and draped in a lion's skin. He entered the arena to slay beasts and men for applause. The historian Cassius Dio wrote, "Rome was transformed into a carnival of madness." In 192 AD, Commodus was assassinated, ending the mighty Antonine dynasty and ushering in more than a century of chaos, the crisis of the 3rd century. The Roman Empire, once invincible, began to disintegrate from within. Civil war followed civil war. In 50 years, more than 26 emperors rose and fell, many before their names could be carved in stone. Provinces broke away, each proclaiming its own emperor: Gaul, Syria, Egypt. To the north, Goths, Vandals, and Franks surged across the borders. To the east, the Parthians rose again to menace Syria. From an empire of order, Rome had become a giant body, slowly tearing itself apart. The economy collapsed. Inflation devoured the currency. Trade routes shattered. Fertile fields lay abandoned, their farmers dead in war or enslaved by the rich. The once glorious city of Rome sank into smoke and fear. The old religion, the worship of Jupiter, Mars, Venus, lost its strength. Amid the chaos, a new faith spread quietly: Christianity. Persecuted, tortured, slaughtered in catacombs and arenas, yet Christians sang in their suffering, and their steadfastness forced the empire itself to wonder: was there a power higher than Caesar? Amid the storm, a leader rose, Septimius Severus, a North African general and founder of the Severan dynasty, 193–235. Courageous, disciplined, and ruthless, Severus reorganized the army, raised soldiers' pay, and fortified the borders, bringing the empire brief respite. But in doing so, he placed the military above the state, and from then on, any general with a loyal legion could seize the throne. His death unleashed waves of rebellion. The empire fractured, the Gallic Empire in the west, the Palmyran Empire in the east. In Rome itself, emperors were made and unmade in months. Power became a commodity bought with blood. By the 3rd century, Rome seemed ready to die. Yet in that darkness, glimmers of salvation appeared. One such light was Aurelian, a humble-born soldier of iron will and sharp mind. He restored discipline, defeated invaders, and reunited the shattered empire. When he entered Palmyra, the radiant city of Queen Zenobia, he spared rather than destroyed it, turning foes into citizens. He built the Aurelian walls around Rome. For the first time in centuries, the eternal city needed to defend itself. But just as stability returned, Aurelian was assassinated by his own guards. Rome plunged once more into shadow. Then came Diocletian, the man who would not only save Rome from extinction, but remake it entirely. Born of humble stock, without noble lineage, he possessed the mind of a master strategist. Seeing that the empire was too vast for one man to rule, in 293 he established the Tetrarchy, the rule of 4. 2 senior emperors, Augusti, and 2 juniors, Caesares, governing together. The empire split into east and west, but shared one soul, one purpose. Diocletian reformed administration, currency, and the army. He built a new capital at Nicomedia, laying the foundation for a powerful eastern center. Yet he also unleashed the fiercest persecution of Christians in Roman history, believing this new faith threatened the empire's unity. Thousands were executed, churches destroyed, but the faith endured, hidden, waiting for another emperor, another dawn. In old age, Diocletian abdicated, retreating to his villa in Dalmatia to grow cabbages. When asked if he regretted relinquishing power, he smiled. "If you could see the cabbages I grow, you would not ask me to return to power." He departed in peace, as one who had fulfilled his duty, though the world he left behind still searched for peace. And then, amid the chaos after Diocletian's retirement, a new figure rose: Constantine. Son of the general Constantius, he grew up amidst blood and ambition. When his father died, the army proclaimed him emperor, and he began the final war to reunite the empire. In 312, at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, before facing Maxentius, Constantine saw a vision in the sky, a cross of light, and the words, "In hoc signo vinces," "By this sign you shall conquer." He ordered the symbol painted upon his soldiers' shields, and triumphed gloriously. From that day, he believed himself chosen by God. In 313, Constantine issued the Edict of Milan, ending centuries of persecution and granting freedom of worship to Christians. He not only protected the new faith, but saw in it the spiritual unity Rome had long lost. From the dark catacombs, the cross rose in sunlight. Churches began to stand beside temples, and faith itself became part of Rome's heart. But Constantine knew the old Rome was weary. The ancient city of Italy could no longer bear the weight of empire. He turned eastward to a land of wealth, strategy, and renewal, and chose Byzantium as his new capital. In 330, he renamed it Constantinopolis, the city of Constantine. Upon the Bosphorus, between the Aegean and the Black Sea, a new Rome was born, radiant and eternal. Constantine was not merely an emperor, but the herald of faith and transformation. Under his reign, Christianity rose from a persecuted faith to become the religion of the imperial court itself. The temples of the old gods gave way to churches and the cross. Greek philosophy met Christian faith, and from that fusion, Europe was born in its first recognizable form. When Constantine died in 337, he was baptized and buried in the Church of the Holy Apostles beneath 12 great columns representing the apostles, as though he himself were the 13th apostle in the story of mankind. Thus ended the century of crisis in what seemed a miracle, Rome reborn. But this was no longer the Rome of Jupiter and Mars. It was the Rome of the cross, of spirit and faith. From Commodus to Constantine, the empire had passed through the abyss, died and been reborn, like the mythical phoenix, perishing in fire only to rise again in light. And when night fell over Constantinopolis, upon the yet unbuilt dome of the future Hagia Sophia, one might imagine hearing the echo of Marcus Aurelius's words, written long ago in the darkness of war. The universe is change. Our life is what our thoughts make it. For it was through crisis that Rome rediscovered its soul. A soul not forged in swords, but in the faith that no power endures unless it carries the light of the Spirit within it. When Constantine's final torch faded atop the domes of his city, the Roman world seemed to pause in silence. The empire had weathered the storm, died, and been reborn in a new faith. Yet like a body grown vast and weary, it no longer had the strength to remain whole. Rome was now divided in two, east and west, two roles of one origin, each walking its own path of destiny. One, aged and fading amid the fires of war, the other, radiant, enduring, carrying Rome's light for another 1,000 years. After Constantine's death in 337, his sons divided the empire to rule together. From then on, the Eastern Empire, with its capital at Constantinople, and the Western Empire, with its capital at Rome, began to drift apart, not only in territory, but in mind and spirit. The West spoke Latin, believing in the power of the sword and honor. The East spoke Greek, immersed in philosophy, ritual, and faith. But history, as always, dealt its harshest hand to the West. From the northern wilderness came the barbarian tides, the Goths, Vandals, Franks, and Huns, sweeping down like a cold wind over the fields and cities of Rome's fading glory. In 410 AD, Rome, the Eternal City, was sacked by the Visigoths under Alaric. Flames devoured temples, the Senate, and libraries. The cries of the dying mingled with the toll of church bells. The ancient world trembled, for it had believed the old maxim, Roma Aeterna, Rome is eternal. The historian Jerome wrote in despair, "The city which took the whole world is itself taken." From that moment, the Western Empire, descended into loss. Frontiers collapsed. Gaul, Hispania, and Britannia fell to the tribes. From the east rode the Huns, led by Attila, the nightmare of Europe. With only his gaze and the thunder of his horsemen, he made the world itself tremble. They called him the Scourge of God. Though halted in Gaul, Rome would never truly recover. Its tax system rotted, its armies dissolved, and child emperors rose and fell like shadows on a dying flame. Finally, in 476 AD, the Germanic general Odoacer deposed Romulus Augustus, the last emperor of the West, and sent the imperial crown eastward to Constantinople. No great battle, no grand funeral. The Western Roman Empire ended in silence. But Rome did not die. It only changed form, withdrawing its spirit to the east, to Constantinople, which stood unbroken, a lighthouse of civilization against the darkening world. The Eastern Roman Empire, known later as the Byzantine Empire, endured for nearly 1,000 years after the fall of Rome. Here, the light of antiquity merged with the faith of the future, creating a civilization unlike any other, a fusion of Greek thought, Roman order, and Christian devotion, forged together like gold in the fire. The zenith of Byzantium came under Justinian b. 527-565, the emperor known as the Last Roman. He dreamed of Renovatio Imperii, the restoration of Rome's ancient glory. For more than 30 years, he and his general Belisarius reconquered North Africa, Italy, and parts of Spain, lands long lost to the barbarians. These victories were not merely military. They were symbols of faith, that Rome still lived. But Justinian's true greatness lay not on the battlefield, but in law and architecture. He gathered all ancient Roman legal codes and forged them into a single system, the Corpus Juris Civilis, the foundation of European law for the next millennium. And at the heart of Constantinople, he built the Hagia Sophia, the House of Holy Wisdom. Its vast dome seemed to hang suspended from heaven, and those who entered stood awestruck, whispering, "Solomon, I have outdone thee." The Hagia Sophia was more than stone. It was the soul of an empire, a prayer of light made permanent in marble. Even today, it stands as proof that art alone can outlast empires. After Justinian, Byzantium survived centuries of war and upheaval. Dynasties rose and fell. Heraclius, Basil, Constantine VII, sometimes glorious, sometimes broken, but never extinguished. It faced the Islamic conquests, lost Syria, Egypt, and Jerusalem, yet held fast to its heart. Constantinople, the jewel between two continents. Through the long Middle Ages, while Europe lay in darkness, Byzantium kept the flame of knowledge alive. In its monasteries and libraries, scholars preserved the works of Plato, Aristotle, and ancient historians. They became the bridge between the classical world and the Renaissance. Without Byzantium, Greek and Roman wisdom might have vanished forever. But time conquers all empires. After the 11th century, Byzantium waned. The Fourth Crusade of 1204, meant to reclaim the Holy Land, instead turned its swords upon Constantinople. The city was looted by those who called themselves Christians. Churches burned, treasures stolen, icons of the Virgin torn from their altars. Though the empire revived afterward, it was but a shadow of itself. Then, in the 15th century, from the east rose the Ottoman Empire, young, strong, and hungry. They surrounded Constantinople, the lone city standing between worlds. The last emperor, Constantine the Paleologos, donned his armor and said to his soldiers, "The city is entrusted to me by God. I shall not surrender it while I live." On May 29th, 1453, after 7 weeks of bombardment, Ottoman cannons shattered the mighty Theodosian walls. Within the Hagia Sophia, citizens prayed as wooden doors splintered, and the last light of Rome was extinguished. After more than 15 centuries, the Roman Empire was no more. Yet its legacy did not fall with its walls. For Rome was never merely a city nor a dynasty. It was an idea, a vision of order, of eternity. The Roman spirit still lives in everything around us. In language, as Latin became the root of Europe's tongues, Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Romanian. In law, through every modern code shaped by the Corpus Juris Civilis. In architecture, through domes, columns, and forum, reborn in cathedrals, palaces, and parliaments across the world. In religion, as the Vatican stands as the spiritual heir to Constantine's faith. And in political thought, where the Roman ideals of citizenship, state, and republic still form the foundation of humanity's governance. As night falls over the Bosphorus, and the wind passes through the domes of Hagia Sophia, one can still hear the echo of Rome, deep, distant, immortal. From the Tiber to the Danube, from Hadrian's Wall to the sands of Syria, the footprints of Rome remain pressed into earth and memory. And though the empire has fallen, the idea of Rome has never died. For Rome was never merely an age. It was humanity's yearning to transcend itself, the faith that order and light can forever conquer darkness and chaos. As the poet Virgil wrote over 2,000 years ago, "The Roman Empire is without end." And indeed, Rome has never ended. It simply changes its form with every century, in every flame of knowledge we kindle today.